I think that's where like the narrative or the story has like more impact in like how you think about your work itself. So generally what happens with even internal work presentations or like your portfolio, you drop in a bunch of screens and then you try to like get to like, hey.
Hi everyone, thanks for tuning in another episode of The Industry. We have a wonderful guest joining us today. Hi Vijay, welcome back to The Industry.
Hi Tejj, nice to see you again.
Yeah, so how's your weekend going so far?
All good so far. Like just started my day a little late, so like the luxury of not having to wake up to meetings. So yeah,
Nice.
just getting started, had breakfast, and yeah, catching up with you. So
Lovely Vijay. So if you could give a quick brief about yourself to the audience who are watching this video.
sure, yeah, I think we have met a few times, so I'm hoping some of the audience have also listened to the previous, conversation. So yeah, hi everyone, I'm Vijay. I'm currently working at Google as a senior UX designer. I've been in design in tech for about like 11 odd years. And before that, I was also like in media as a designer for a few years. So, yeah. And I've worked mostly in enterprise tech for a while, like for the last almost 10 years. It has been like first with a startup, then at a much larger company called Pega, and then now at Google. And yeah. So it's mostly been in like enterprise tech that I've worked as a UX or product designer. But before that, I was also at a services company where I worked for close to 5 years. We used to work on very exciting consumer products. So I have a mix of like experience in these two different spheres of design that we look at. And yeah, I'm based out of Hyderabad. I love the community here, and I've been here since my college days. So I enjoy just spending time with friends in the design community and love the city. So don't plan to move anywhere. But yeah, in between for a couple of years, I was in Pune and I worked there for like about 2 years. So yeah, that's about me.
That's wonderful, Vijay. So, without further ado, let's get started into today's episode, which
Okay.
is designing the story, not just screens. And one of
Okay.
the most frequently asked questions in our mentorship sessions is also how to draft this story, how to create that portfolio. So let's get started with that. And folks, whoever watching this video, there are certain slides that Vijay also have, which he'll keep bringing up as in when our conversation is there. So make sure you stay tuned and watch it, not just typically listen it, so that you get even more practical insights out of it.
Yeah.
So the very first thing that we'll go with is like reframing portfolios as stories. So Vijay, you
Okay.
often mention that storytelling makes a portfolio memorable or forgettable as well. So what makes a portfolio feel more like a compelling story than a list of projects?
So I think one aspect is we can look at this even not just as portfolio, but even internally when you're presenting your work. What do people remember the most is like how do you even communicate the best way about the work that you're doing? So it applies to both like a portfolio and even internally if you're doing any presentations. And I think that's where like the narrative or the story has like more impact in like how you think about your work itself. So generally what happens with even internal work presentations or like your portfolio, you drop in a bunch of screens and then you try to like get to like, hey, this is what the problem was and this is what I did and this is what it looks like. But what you sort of like forget is like the context, like who are the people that you're presenting to? What do they know about your work? What do they know about like what you're trying to even achieve? So that's where like structuring it within a framework of a story really helps. Like you start like questioning like, okay, what is it I'm trying to tell? Who are they? Who are listening to it? If it is a portfolio, it's someone completely external to your org. and like you have to think of like bringing them to understand what were you doing, why did you end up even like working on this thing, what was the challenge, and how do you tell it best is usually as a narrative or a story is what we can call it. So most often people tend to skip that aspect, and because they're always thinking of presenting their work, just the you know the UI itself. So that's where I think thinking of it like a story really helps.
That's really interesting. So, how can designers avoid making portfolios or their presentations dry and just filled with all screens?
So again, I think when we talk about portfolios, right, like there might be like thousands of such conversations on YouTube or everywhere that people can go look at. Uh, Everyone shares from their experience of like, sometimes it can also be biased. I want to just put it across, right? Like, okay, this is how I've been thinking of it. Doesn't mean it's the only way to look at it,
The
but
right one.
yeah. So having said that, one thing that we see is that really the context is what is missing. Like usually when people start looking at their work, so I want to see what you designed, but I also want to see why you did that. What were the reasons why you arrived at that solution? What were your challenges with it? And the other aspect I want to really look at, which sometimes is missing in most portfolios, is what are you like to work with. Of course, there are other ways within the interviews that people get to know that different interview rounds, but still, the portfolio should also showcase who you are as an individual. Like, what are you like to work with? How do you work with others? And within tech, it's usually like, how do you work with engineering? How do you work with product? How do you work with leadership? Or like when somebody challenges you, what do you do? When somebody doesn't agree to a solution, how do you work around that? Or when there are like multiple ideas, how do you actually like pick the best one for your users? What do you do there? So all these are the story aspects that are missing in most portfolios. People go from like the typical double diamond way of like, oh, this is the project. They talk about it, then they say, okay, I did wireframes, and somebody puts in like personas, and again they pick names for personas, and that just is something that pisses me off the most. But and then they'll have like this, oh, these are the personas, blah blah blah. I don't even see the connect. Like, why are they even doing those things? Like,
Hey, thanks for tuning in. So, after creating over 250 plus videos and engaging in countless conversations with creative leaders from around the world, I'm thrilled to share my book, Notes of Wisdom Lessons from 100 Creative Visionaries. So, this book is labor of love that has deeply resonated with the community, entering into Amazon's bestseller list and reaching the top 3 on hottest new release list. So, what makes me proudest is that many creative leaders have read this book and shared their remarkable perspectives on this book. The best thing about this book is its price. It's just priced around 500 rupees because this isn't about making profits, but it's about spreading a movement. So these pages contain transformative insights that can reshape you how you see the world through the lens of design. So find your copy on Amazon, available on worldwide, and on India we have Flipkart. So thank you so much for your support. Please share this book with someone whose life might be enriched by these creative insights. So together, let's champion the truth that design isn't just a profession or a skill, it's a beautiful way of living a life.
what prompted them to do that? It's missing most often. And then they get to, okay, here's like my final visual design. And that's it. That's the end of the story. I'm like, okay, what were the challenges of actually like working on this? What happened after you actually built, like designed it? Did it get built? If it get built, how did you launch it? What happened after that? Did you iterate on it? And tell me more about like even these personas. Who are they, and like what are their challenges? Did you partner with a researcher? Were you the only designer? What was it like in your org, in your team? So all these aspects are missing, and that's why that's something I think everyone should address when they're putting together a portfolio. And we even do this internally, right? Like imagine, like you and me, we might be familiar because every work that we do goes through a lot of like
Presentations,
reviews,
yes.
approvals, presentations, and then we also take our work externally. Like we talk about it even to our users in a way. So yeah, that I think is something that is missing in a lot of early designers' portfolios. So yeah.
That's wonderful. So let's now talk about the second part, which is applying design thinking to portfolio writing. So
Okay.
I really like this in your presentation when you the way how you have framed portfolio for specific users, like for recruiters it should
Yeah.
be different, for hiring managers it should be, or for your teammates. So could you walk us through how could designers tailor their writing for each of these different scenarios?
Okay. So that's a like when everybody asks me like how should I go about designing my portfolio, the first thing I ask them like where are you applying? Like which company are you going for? And they're like, why? Like, does it really matter? Like, they're like, I have one portfolio. I'll apply everywhere. I'll click, click, click on the LinkedIn job post, and I'd like send the same portfolio to everybody. And I'm like, okay, that's still fine. But like, when you actually get like selected to interview, you should really think about like who are you actually presenting this to, and that's when that whole like aspect of looking at it like almost like, hey, here's a product that I'm designing. If you think of your portfolio as a product, then who are the users for this product? That then triggers like a design thinking approach to your portfolio itself. And when you ask that question, I think most people will think, oh, whoever is interviewing me, that is my user. But that's not the case. Like there's also the recruiter who first looks at it. They look at your CV, they look at your portfolio. And in fact, I call them the gatekeepers because you can't get past them some way. Like, you either like they let you in or you jump the wall. You can't get to the actual interview. So that's like your first user. So you have to think of them. And I think a great like way to look at it is even like when you go to any LinkedIn job post, it says 1,000 people already applied or something like that. So imagine like one recruiter and they're getting bombarded with like all these people applying. Just step into their shoes. That's your first user. So what is life like for them? The larger the company, maybe they have a dedicated design recruiter. But the smaller the company, it's very likely that the recruiter is like responsible for all roles. So they don't even have any special training or like they don't have the support to understand what good design is. So these inform you how to, you know, present it to that like user, which is your recruiter. So I think for them, usually it is that they really spend less time. And in all honesty, there are some biases. Like if they're a large tech company, they look for people who have worked in similar roles or like similar like companies. There's also when recruiting early designers, there is a bias for like where they come from, like which college and all that. And that simply cannot be dismissed. But having said that, the other thing that they really look for is I think relevance. Like, so that's why I also tell everybody to tailor when they're applying for a job. Like, let's say somebody's applying for a startup. In fact, some recruiters who are like hiring for startups, they ignore profiles from like people who have worked at like large companies or like large service companies and tech companies because they're like, maybe they won't be a good fit for us. So how do you make sure that in your first paragraph that you have there in your CV itself, not even the portfolio, that tells them that you are someone who's relevant to what they're hiring for? Let's say it's a niche or some sort of like a commerce startup. If you have any relevant experience, put it up front, saying that, hey, I'm a designer, blah, blah, blah. And then like, I have worked in this space. So tell them that you worked in like the consumer, like e-commerce space and like peer-to-peer marketplace or whatever it is that you worked, even if it is one project, make sure you bring that up. And that gives you a chance for the recruiter to say, oh, maybe they'll be a good fit. Let me look at the rest of the CV and then they'll click on the portfolio and then they'll look at it. So that's what I mean by like thinking of your portfolio as almost a product and thinking of these users. And with the recruiter, what do they know about design? Some companies train design recruiters and even non like the recruiter, they tell them that, hey, look, this is what a good portfolio looks like. or like they tell them, hey, don't look at Behance and then just send us those profiles. Please look through like what they're talking about their work. But that training is missing in most places, so they usually look at aesthetics. And it's as good as like, even we, like when we look at uh, even a garden, like if there's a plant that is flowering and it is like well groomed, we think, oh, that's a nice spot. Whereas if there is a big shrub somewhere, we don't even like look at that. So their way of looking at the portfolio is also like a quick scan, and it has to look really well put together, clear communication. And as they're scanning, if there are like multiple case studies, we have to make sure there are like hero slides for each of the case study that captures what it is. And even there, drop as much as you can in keywords around relevance to that role. Like again, it's a e-commerce company, make sure you're highlighting work that is related to that. If it is a large tech, bring in similar work. Anything that's there in your existing years of work that is relevant most to this company, bring it up and then make it more like prominent in the portfolio. So I think that's for this first user. So yeah, that's what I mean by like thinking through. So you have to again do that for like, okay, who else are the users for my portfolio? There's a hiring manager. There are others in the team that will look at it. So for each one of them, you'll have to identify what do they need. Like you can step into those shoes. Like if you know somebody who's a manager and is recruiting, reach out, like set up time with that person, like on ADP list, find someone who's like a design manager, ask them, hey, what do you look at in portfolios? What are the challenges you have when you're browsing portfolios? What are your like things that piss you off or like things that impress you? And then that can inform like, hey, so this persona that you have for your portfolio, they prioritize these things. So for a manager, it's mostly relevance and also a bit of like that culture fit that can come up in the portfolio. Like, how do you approach problems? How do you plan your work? Most people also skip that. Like, again, maybe a bias from just working in large tech companies, but it's like we have simultaneous projects happening. We have to manage our work as well, workload. So how like can you bring that aspect when you talk about a case study? Like, oh, this thing we were working in the like Q2 of this year, there was so much chaos, or like these things were happening. There were multiple other projects happening. I still had to do something for this. How did I work on it? Did I reach out to my manager for like some sort of like support, or like did I team up with someone else who was working on something similar? So those are things that show how you can work in a similar environment. So that's what the managers are usually looking for, beyond like just good work, of course. So yeah, so you have to think of all these users and like come up with how do I make sure that my portfolio meets all their requirements.
That's wonderful answer, Vijay. So now let's
Yeah,
talk
maybe.
about, yeah, you have
Yeah,
spoken
sorry.
so in detail about it, so it's really nice.
Maybe we'll give people like I spoke a lot, so maybe we'll give them a little something fun to look at. So this was
Yeah.
actually spoke about this at the Friends of Figma event that happened recently. And something fun I shared there was like this. Imagine you yourself or like your portfolio as a product, then what is it that people are actually looking for? So this is actually a little sarcastic, but it's just a fun way to say that, hey, they're looking for someone who's like an all-in-one, multi-talented, pixel perfect like designer who can like, handle everything from like research, copy, or like business strategy and all that. And it's like those hair growth serums that do nothing.
Yeah.
So it was just a fun way to say that, hey, this is what the world is looking for. How do you make sure you come across as this? Like, yeah. But yeah, I just wanted to again bring up something visual to break.
Yeah.
Like we spoke a lot, so
This is wonderful, Vijay. So let's now talk about
yeah.
the work journal that you keep mentioning.
Okay.
So why is it such a powerful tool? If you could explain and enlighten
Yes.
us.
Yeah. Something that we all experience is some random day a message comes in your inbox from a friend who wants to refer you, or from a recruiter that is trying to reach out to you, and then you are like, oh, maybe this is actually a good opportunity. What is the first thing you think? my portfolio is not ready. I'm like, okay, can I do it over the weekend? Can I do it like in, yeah, maybe I'll like spend a night and I'll like put together. That's how most of us operate, right? So there is something I keep telling people as well, like every 3 months, like update your portfolio. And then I don't do it myself. So it's like giving advice that I don't follow. But it's difficult because there's so much happening in our own work lives, personal lives. There's never time for portfolio until it is time for it. Like you need it and you're like, oh, I have to spend time to put it together. So that's where the work journal really helps. But the other thing is also that when you're starting to think of talking about your work, you miss out many things. Things that happen every day, you think they are insignificant, but maybe there is a very interesting insight or like something relevant that you can bring into your portfolio that just you might miss if you hadn't documented it. The good thing that happens at work is like for whatever reason we are asked to like write about things that we did this week or like how was this week going. So that's a practice that we do. Sometimes we treat it almost like a checklist of like, yeah, I was asked to do this, or yeah, I did this, or like, oh, I'm exploring this, I'm doing something outside of the core work, but here's what I'm doing. We just keep bullet points, right? Checklist kind of stuff, but make it a little broader than that. Start documenting moments that were interesting that happened that day. Like maybe you were working on a project and something interesting about accessibility happened, like a bug or like whatever, or like you did like work with like an engineer that day and together like it was like a back end engineer who had no context of front end, but they were thrown into the project, and then you being a designer, they reached out and you're like, I'm not a front end guy, but together you somehow fix something and you would completely forget about it. You would think it is not even something worthy of talking about, but at some point in relevance to something it might actually be interesting. Unless you have a journal, you wouldn't have even recollected that. So that's why I talk about like a work journal, updated on a Friday, updated at the end of the week, and that's absolutely fine. Keep like running notes every day. Like I use stickies, the Mac stickies for like everyday stuff. And by the on Friday mornings, usually we take everything from the stickies, we write it a little bit more context to each one of those aspects, anything that is interesting, and that's in a Google Doc. And usually there is a work tracker where like the the work progress is being tracked, but outside of that you need this journal. And now with the power of LLMs, it actually makes it quicker for you. Imagine you have that journal, and imagine you have a project now that you're putting in your portfolio. You can actually say, hey, look at my journal, all things about this project, write something to highlight aspects like this, like highlight creativity, problem solving, highlight, like it'll bring you all those relevant points. And that's like you can put it in Notebook LM or like any of your AI tools, and that journal will become so much more powerful for you. So that's why I think having that work journal is really important.
Wow, that's definitely also useful whenever you want to have conversations about your growth and
Yes.
journey in the company as well.
Oh yeah,
So,
yeah, that's a great point. In fact, I
yeah.
think that's one of the things that someone who was mentoring me also told me a long time ago, which is like update your portfolio every 3 months, keep a log of things that you're doing, and that's what you use when you go for a promo or like you're talking about your work to your skip or like higher ups.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So let's jump to the next point, which is you
Okay.
also map UX, stories to frameworks like Hero's Journey and all. Can you give us an
Uh,
example of a how a case study can follow that arc like ordinary world to written with the Excel?
okay. So this is talking about a framework for stories, right? So maybe again, a visual might help. I'll just share my screen. A bit of context to paper, which is like I studied like filmmaking and all that. So as part of that 3-year program, one of the specializations was film and television production, and within that there was a screenwriting course, and like I loved it, and that's where the first time I learned that there is a framework to even story writing. And later, like years later, you discover, like even at work, when you talk about like, oh, how do I present my work, people will tell you use the star framework. Like, what was the situation, what was the task, or like the action that you did, and what was the result or the outcome from it. And there are many other frameworks, but those are like very, like, they, like frameworks like that usually turn into very narrow, like narrative. If you want to broaden it up, that's when you start looking at the storytelling frameworks from other industries. You borrow from like screenwriting, which is where the hero's journey is mostly used, but there are others as well. So what this talks about is like a typical like story is about a protagonist. Like, the word is used as hero, but you can think of it as like any character. And that character goes through this whole journey of like, oh, they start and then they run into some sort of a challenge. Their life was like ordinary. They run into a challenge that throws them into like an extraordinary world, whether like they're fighting monsters or like aliens have appeared or like something less than that, maybe like just a uh, more drama of like just family or friends facing some challenge and all that. So that's like they're going from a very ordinary world to an extraordinary world. They probably discover some sort of like a solution. Like, if it's a mythology or something, it's usually magic or like a weapon or something. But in real life, maybe it is just that idea that you got to solve like the work problem that you're having. So that's like you get some help or like that solution, and then it's like you're approaching the final sort of like battle. Like you like win or like triumph over that challenge, and then it's like you again come back to your like normal life. So that's like a framework of like just narrating a story, but how do you apply it to work, right? Like, um if I can think of it like, you think of this ordinary world as, the stage at which you actually get pulled into a project, or like a problem is shared by your PM, or like you discovered it, whatever it might be, like, but you give context to that world. Like, hey, I'm a designer, or like I was a designer at this company, and then I was in this team. This is what we usually do. Like, what does your team even do? And then within that, maybe research found out this thing that was happening that is leading to the call to adventure, or like the challenge that you faced. So here's your ordinary world. Here's everyone that you work with, how you work, what you do broadly, and then suddenly something happened. Like, whether it was like a drop in like user monthly active users, or like something like a new product your competitor has launched and you have to like compete with them, or maybe something even innovative, like, oh, we think we have this idea and then we have to make it happen. So that is also a different kind of challenge. Like, you now have a vision, how do you make it possible? Like, how do you implement that vision for your product? So that is like the call to adventure, or like the challenge that you come across. And then how do you then go about it? Like, what trials and like what kind of battles do you go through? Like, who helps you, who you're fighting against? So these are like just metaphors, but it's like what challenges you faced with people as well. Like, okay, you had a vision, but then the same vision was shared by like multiple teams. Again, typical of like a large tech, but how do you then collaborate across that? That's a narrative. Maybe in a smaller startup, it's like time was just your biggest monster. Like, you had this great idea, but that you had to ship it within like the next month. Now that, like, you identify that challenge, and then like what happened after that, and then everything that you went through, the stages of like your work, what happened. So you're narrating that, and then you talk about like the big thing, like whether it's the product launch or like a demo at a large event, or like if it's even a early startup, if it was the POC that you built it, did you go pitch it to some investor and did they give you the money or not? So that's the whole, like, that's the way you tell a story, and that's the framework to use. And yeah, I think people can apply. Again, something that I caution is whenever we teach design and or we study design, the first time we came across the double diamond, everybody started exactly putting those titles, right?
Yeah.
So these are not for you to put as titles or anything. This is an invisible framework. This is just for helping you in building that narrative. So it's not to be titles for your slides. It's not to be sections in your document that you're thinking of writing. So that's it's just a framework for your thought process and how you will tell your story about your work.
Thanks for sharing this, Vijay. So, Vijay, you often empathize about showing the journey, not the process. So, what do you mean by that? And if you could break us that statement for us.
Yeah, so this, I think we started our whole conversation with the same question, right? Like, we said, we referenced it as like people showing just the screens and not telling us about their project enough. That's exactly what we mean by like include the journey and not just the outcome, which is like most often we look at the outcome being like, okay, here's my screens for this project or like this challenge, but who did you work with, what did you do, what were the challenges? So everything we spoke about so far actually summarizes this aspect, which is like make sure you bring all those into your case study. So that's what we mean by like the journey, like how you started, what you did, who you partnered with. Most often people miss out on the research insights. So if you worked with a researcher or if you did it yourself, what was the findings from that? And some things that people do, they cook up research findings. Like they actually don't do the research. They say, okay, these are my personas, like John Appleseed or like whatever, and age and all that. That's not how it happens. So don't be dishonest. But if you have honestly done anything, like bring that first, like your understanding of the problem statement, so others can also get that or gain that understanding. Because most often, whatever we work, the other person doesn't know about it, especially in the context of interviews. They have no idea what your project is about. It might be the biggest thing for your company, but externally nobody knows about it. So this journey actually helps onboard them. Like they are part of this whole process. They can experience it as you actually went through. So that's where again our story framework also that we spoke about the hero's journey. It's like,
Correct.
okay, I was here, then I did this, then I did that. This was my challenge. How we worked with the people, how we ensured we did the right thing and all that. So that's what I mean by like the journey and not just the outcome.
That's wonderful, Vijay. So, what are some of the common mistakes you see early designers make when they present their process?
When presenting process, most often it is a bit too bookish and idealistic. And it's almost like that cookie cutter way of like step one, step two, step three. Often that's not how real work happens. So be more honest, like even if it's a hackathon project, even if it is some thesis that you did at college, be more honest, be more real about like how you actually worked. And within that, find a good structure in telling it. So that's the first thing I would say, like very broad thing. Then as we get into the specifics, avoid like sticking to a very rigid process step wise and all that. Don't break it down like that. Make sure you acknowledge like your role, anybody else that you helped you or like anybody else that you partnered with, you collaborated with and all that. And then also focus on just not the like screens, but everything that we spoke about so far again. Like make sure you highlight all aspects of design and not just the UI. Having said that, increasingly we are also seeing people having so much narration and then last may they put one screen or like two screens with like mocked up in devices, one or four screens. Then no, please show that you also know how to design the UI, you also know how to actually work with the tooling. In fact, if it is possible, create a video or like some sort of a prototype that shows the entire thing where somebody can like quickly watch it. If there are micro interactions, highlight them. Show the craft as well. I'm not saying ignore it. Like the only thing we are worried about is people just plastering some screens. So avoid that, but at the same time, don't ignore like your craft as well. That is also super important. And if there are things that you learned along the way, even in your tool, like if it's Figma, and while doing this project, you learned about using variables. highlight that. Put one screen about like how you used it, how it solved some problem for you, or if you figured out some challenges with your own design system that you are using and you fixed it, or like you raised those concerns, make sure you highlight that, or like things like that. Like craft, but at the same time, like the whole context and how you worked in that. So most often people focus on one of those aspects but miss out the other things. Those are the things I see like common mistakes or like things that people miss out on. Not really a mistake, but you are like, as I said, portfolio is always a midnight project. It starts on a Friday night or a Saturday night, and you have to send it to somebody on Monday. So when people are working in that crunch mode, they usually miss out on things. So yeah. Another thing, sorry, this I have to talk about, which is the whole idea of personas. I don't know where it came from, where they are being taught this, but please, like, maybe just look up the word proto persona. That will actually help. Like, when we borrow a lot from social sciences, this is something that I've said a lot of times when I speak to people. Research is something that has been happening since ages, even before tech companies existed, and we borrowed those same aspects and we brought it into our own like design world where we call it as user research. Consumer research was happening, and when they were doing those studies, usually that's when you came up with like this persona saying, oh, we want this demographic, we want to reach out to like working women who also have to, cook at home. I'm just giving an example, and they want to focus on a certain age group. That kind of a thing is helpful when you want to like filter out and reach out to individuals. That's not how a persona is defined when you're actually looking at the output of that research.
Correct.
When you're looking at all these people that you spoke to and everything that they have said, and you start observing patterns like behavioral patterns or something, and then you come up with a persona. An example I can give is during my like master's course that I was doing as a like it was actually a part-time thing I was doing, and then one of the projects that we did was for uh, Bangalore International Airport, and it was during COVID. So when we started looking at and speaking to people, we were reaching out to like pilots or like whatever, like people who are flying and all that. But once we looked at all the data, the personas that we came up with were very different. They were like, okay, frequent flyer. No, frequent flyer is a persona. It is someone who's like used to the like going to an airport, taking a flight, going through the security. They know everything about that. And then there is someone who's like first time flyer. First time flyer is probably using it because it is a quick way for them to get to somewhere in an emergency, or like first time they're flying. They have no idea what the airport even like what does it even mean to go through it. And then like we had these other things like someone who is helping somebody travel, like an elderly person, or they have someone to take care of. So those are the kind of personas that come into play. So that is what a persona is. And in a tech product, you can look at roles. Like if you have defined roles, your research team might have already said, okay, hey, for our product, we have roles like there is a seller, there is like some support guy, and there's some other roles. So those are again your personas where roles become personas for you, not like Pooja, age 30, loves music. No, that's not the persona for your product. That's when you want to categorize a demographic that you want to reach out and actually interview very broadly. So those are very two different. Like the people mess this up, and that's the first thing that throws me off. And like we literally stop looking at the portfolio after that. So
Thanks, Vijay. So let's talk about writing portfolios now. So you have a great tip on using active voices, infographics, and concise language. So why do these matter so much for a portfolio, and what are your writing advices for the portfolio?
oh, great question. I think this is actually the most important aspect about everything that we spoke today. It's actually the content in your case study, portfolio, presentation, whatever. It is the language that is equally important to like the screens or whatever. Most often, what we see when people present their portfolio is one, maybe it is a PDF, something they've created in Figma, or like I've even seen people publish on Behance. Um, they have like a big blob of text, People, in fact, squeeze down the font size to make sure that the text is fitting. I'm like, nobody's reading that. So going back to when we said that look at this as a design thinking problem, you're saying who are my users? We spoke about recruiters, they don't have time. Design managers, hiring managers, they don't have time. Your co-workers, they're doing all the work every day, and then manager tells them, hey, look at this portfolio, tell me, is it like good? They're also not having that time to actually spend so much on your portfolio. So nobody looking at your portfolio actually has time. Maybe there's a very interesting book I can share something, which is, let's look at this video. I hope it plays. I'll also slow it down a bit. Yeah, it's already at zero point 0.5. Maybe that's good enough. Um, Let me just play this out. Yeah, just like going back by maybe a frame. So this is like a sentence that someone is trying to write, and then what they're trying to show you is like there's a lot of redundant words there. What are you trying to tell is actually that writing for busy readers needs that you communicate more effectively. So this itself is the book, and I encourage everybody to like buy a PDF version of this, or like a physical book if that's what you love. And yeah, but this is the gist of everything that we'll talk today, which is you're writing for very busy people. So make sure you acknowledge that and you write and communicate effectively. In fact, this one book cover itself shows you a lot of interesting things, which is like make sure you highlight things that have to stand out, reduce redundant words and like redundancy in how you're writing about it, make it crisp and brief. And yeah, that's really like the everything else that we talk about now is just this concept. Like you're writing for busy people, so make sure you think of that. So in terms of okay, what does that mean, right? I can say again, you brought up things that I mentioned. This is a talk again a while ago, so I'm trying to recollect as well. But uh, one is like write about it in active voice. Like usually we say things like team did this, we did that. I That's great, but at least in a portfolio I want to know what you did. So make sure you're also talking about what exactly that you did. And be more direct in the statements that you're making, and of course make them really short and like really effective. In fact, what I encourage people to do is always create a slide or like Google Slides or like PowerPoint or anything like a presentation or pitch.com or any new tool that does great presentations. I'm agnostic of the tool, but the idea is that you're creating a presentation. You have hero visuals, you have very small real estate for your text. So that will force you to think within the don't reduce font size, but make sure you put in like your words, like be picky about like what you're saying. In fact, everything that you want to talk when you're presenting your portfolio doesn't have to be on the screen. That can be in the speaker notes, and don't leave it out. Actually put it in the speaker notes. Whenever I get slides or ppts, I actually like expand that speaker notes to see what they're saying. That also helps in a great way. And even when presenting, you can have that you know uh, Microsoft PPT and also Google Slides has it where you can see your notes while you're presenting. So that way also it will help you. So think of what you're saying, but then what you put on the screen, be very concise, be very effective in the words that you use. In fact, look at it like money you're spending. So the lesser words, the better, and how effective can you be with that? So that's one important thing. What I mean by like writing concisely, writing in like your active voice, and yeah. And I think you mentioned about infographics, right?
Yes.
Yeah, with infographics, I think what I mean by that is what is the best way you can help somebody learn about something.
Mm.
When we start presenting our work, the listener or like whoever you're presenting to, they have no idea about your work. So how can you quickly give them that context? And I think infographics are a great way of doing that. Like visualize your problem statement. Show them, like, let's say one problem statement I was solving for was thousands of calls are being made at this company. They're a sales company, and then like what's happening in these calls? How does anybody even know? So we built a solution on top of that, like analyzing all those conversations, pulling topics from it, and all that. But it's very complex to explain what it does. So an infographic can be like there's somebody on a call, like there's a blurb of text of all the call that they're doing. Can even make a GIF, like the text is moving, and then there are very interesting things that are being picked out of it, and those become like topics. So imagine you create an infographic of that. It is so powerful. Somebody looking at it immediately gets what you're trying to do. So that way, I would expect you, when you're onboarding your case study, the context slides, one or two slides, should be infographic or like visually rich, and they should help me become like aware of all that. What is the product area? What is it exactly trying to solve? Who are the users? You can explain that so effectively if you do it with an infographic. So yeah, those are some of the writing slash like infographic tips for a portfolio.
The advices that you give goes beyond portfolios also, as I feel like with the
Yes.
products that we design should also be written very
Yeah.
concise and the meaning should be very clear
Yeah.
and it should not be redundant. So thank you so
Yeah.
much
Yeah.
for
Yeah.
that, Vijay. And wanted to ask you this, which you also covered in your talk, which was how can someone who isn't confident in English can still write compelling case studies, and that too with rise of AI. We are seeing a lot
Yeah.
of text being flooded into portfolios by use of AI. It's okay
Yeah.
that it's enabling people, but what's the right way to use it, and also how somebody who isn't confident about their language can still effectively communicate their work?
Great. So here the two things. One, the aspect of you know someone who's like native language is different from English, right? For most of us, like we studied English at school, and then it became a language of how we communicate with the world. So here we are, even we are talking in English, but it's okay. Like even if someone is not good at it, what they can do is first think in your native language. Like if it's Telugu, yeah, start by writing about your work in Telugu first, draft that, and then you can start like translating it into like transcribing it into your like in into English, and then you can use tools. But I think more than that, more than the aspect of language, I would say there's a different technique which I follow is I create a table, literally like a table in it can be in Excel, in Google Sheets, or even do it in your doc itself. You can insert a table. The columns that I want to have there is just like the slide number. What am I like? What exactly am I talking about in that slide? What is the idea? What is it that I'm trying to tell in that slide? And then I have two more columns: the visual, the wording that will be there on the slide. I don't even jump directly into the PPT or to a Google slide or to Figma to put together my presentation. I first do it in a doc. So I would say yes, language is a constraint, but often where people struggle is when they start with a blank canvas and then they're trying to design their way through it. Don't design first, like write first and write it in a table. That's like a very uh, unconventional way of doing it, but write it in a table. It's literally like, okay, I have a 30-minute portfolio round, or I have a 20-minute presentation with my VP. That itself tells you how many slides you can have. Now you have like those many rows. Now you have a constraint. Maybe three, four can be more or less, whatever, but you have a constraint. Now within that constraint, now you have these columns of like, what is the idea? What is the key thing you're telling? What is the slide visual? What is the slide text? And your speaker notes. All these are the columns, and then the each slide is a row. Once you fill this in, trust me, your designing will become very easy. If you jump into design without this, you will be like maybe like a artist. You're painting. You're going by your vibe. That's not how a portfolio, you know, is actually built. So yeah, first write it, And you can do that even in Telugu if English is a challenge. Once you are clear in your thought of like how you want to talk about your work, then translate it to English.
That's wonderful, Vijay. So thank you so much, Vijay, for sharing such wonderful tips. So
Yeah.
now let's shift to this question where a lot of students and people who are shifting careers, they doesn't have their, real project out yet. So what's your advice to somebody like that? And what work should they put in their portfolio?
I think it's been so long since, I'm trying to think of myself first. Like, when was the last time I had that kind of a challenge? But as we speak to a lot of, people on ADP list, I've come across them asking this question. So one thing is self-initiated projects are also great, like, but don't make them like visual redesigns. Look at even one single aspect about a certain app that you use every day. How would you improve it? And dedicate like a real design exercise to it. If you are the sole designer, then you're doing research. I mean, a great example I can give you is I don't know if you have observed, Swiggy and all these apps have stopped showing us the map by default. Earlier, it used to be like they would show the map and then there's like your delivery guys here taking this turn like this and that. And like they were actually spending money to show you that map because they have to use the map APIs, right? Now, people are so used to quick delivery. They've completely even stopped caring. I order, I put my phone away. He will come in 5 minutes, 10 minutes. I don't actually worry so much as I used to in the earlier days of adopting to. So that was a very interesting insight that somebody shared. So look for those insights in a certain app and then change. Like someone I was talking to from IIT Hyderabad, they were building a budgeting app just for students. That's fantastic. Like they're solving a problem that they're actually facing. So they have so much context. There are so many users around them. They can actually do the research. They can be thorough about it, and they have personal experience. But also there are so many others around them that they can speak to, and then put together a great case study. So pick a problem that is relevant, go deep into it, and present that, even if it is a self-initiated project. That's for students mostly, or even your thesis project. But apply the same things that we spoke about, give context, take them through the journey, show the outcome first, and then the all the steps that you have done and highlight that. And yeah. And for anyone who is like in an early design role, it is more like this. Like they're usually challenged by the scope of the project. So don't worry about that. Even if you can combine multiple projects together as like one large case study, that would also help.
That's truly insightful. So before we close, let's talk about iteration of portfolios and the feedback.
Yes.
So what's your take on that, and why is it a vital part of this journey?
It's absolutely the most like important thing to do. Most often, what happens is people put together the case study and their portfolio, and then they go interview. Nobody looked at it other than them, which is really sad because you could have 10x the portfolio. Just take it to other friends, like other people, like go on to ADP list, like sign up for a session, walk through somebody through your portfolio. It's also great if you have like a UX writer or a copywriter friend or someone in advertising who does copy. Just go to them and say, hey, this is the presentation I have. Let me just present it to you. You're also practicing, you're getting invaluable like insight from people who are looking at it for the first time, which will what your eventual interviewer is also going through. They're looking at it for the first time. What do they observe? So iteration by sharing, that's what I would really encourage. Like share broadly, share it with friends, mentors, anyone that you can get hands on. Find 30 minutes, just present the case study, one case study to one person, another to another person, optimize. But get feedback and then iterate on it.
This is really wonderful, Vijay. And before we close,
Yeah.
wanted to ask like if someone is listening to this or watching this video today, and if they decided to rework on their portfolio. So what's that one change or one thing that they should make it right away?
I think people watch a lot of these videos and then do nothing. So my biggest ask from anyone who's watching this is, hey, start a doc today. Like just go start a doc and then put down those 30 rows and those 5 columns that we spoke about, and just visualize your portfolio and think about it without actually designing it. Write about it. What is the key idea, the takeaway that you want to give to people as you're like building your each slide in your portfolio? What will be the visual you will show? What will be the words on it? And do that without actually designing your portfolio first and see how far you can get. And yeah, that exercise itself is a great like something new for most people, and also it will make you think about your portfolio in a way that you probably didn't do. So yeah, that's one thing I would ask them to do. Everything else will fall into place after that.
It's all about starting out. So start today,
Yes.
start now.
Yes.
We hope this video has helped you out. Thank you so much, Vijay, for sharing almost everything in detail. And
Yeah.
this is like packed with so many insights. So thank you once again, Vijay, and thanks everyone who has watched the video till here. Now it's your time to make that portfolio and shine. I'll be attaching Vijay's ADP list and LinkedIn as well. Feel free to book a session with Vijay. And thank you so much once again, Vijay.
Yeah. Thanks, Dave, and thanks everyone who watched this. But yeah, the takeaways start well, like building your portfolio.
Yes.